Everyone has a theory about why Canada's housing market is broken. Immigration, foreign buyers, investors, greedy developers, politicians pointing fingers in every direction, except at themselves. But here's the part that might surprise people. Most of the blame is pointed at the wrong targets. Foreign buyers aren't driving prices the way people think. Immigration isn't the core reason the market exploded. And the groups taking heat online often aren't the ones shaping the system. Even in our own comments, we've seen people pointing to foreign ownership as a major factor. Others claim immigrants flooded the market. These comments reflect a conversation happening across the country. So today, we're breaking the debate open. We're looking at the numbers, the policies, the political decisions, and the provincial differences that actually created Canada's housing crisis, and the ones still making it worse. Let's start with what everyone thinks is the root cause, and why that answer is wrong. This claim that immigrants caused the housing crisis is one of the most common online, but the math doesn't support it. Immigration levels did rise after 2021, but permanent residents weren't the main source of the sudden population spike. The real surge came from temporary residents, international students, work permit holders, and asylum claimants. Canada added roughly 1 million temporary residents in just 2.5 years. Permanent residents increased too, but at a far more predictable rate. The real issue wasn't just immigration. It was that the federal government rapidly expanded temporary resident intake at a speed the housing system wasn't built for.
Look, folks, it's simple to me. Canada needs more people. Canadians understand the need to continue to grow our population if we're going to meet the needs of the labor force, if we're going to rebalance a worrying demographic trend, and if we're going to continue to reunite families and to do right by the world and make good on our commitments to support some of the world's most vulnerable.
Even Immigration Minister Mark Miller admitted the country's intake exceeded the capacity of the country to provide housing and services. But here's the critical contradiction. Immigration policy and housing policy were operating on separate tracks. IRCC increased intake, while CMHC continued forecasting slowing construction. 2 departments, 2 targets, 1 housing market, and no alignment. When systems disagree, markets break. Another belief gaining attention is that foreign buyers distorted the housing market. And while it's true foreign purchases received massive media attention, especially in areas like Vancouver and Toronto, the national data paints a different picture. Foreign buyers represent less than 3% of residential property nationwide. In urban cores, the number is higher, but still nowhere close to the levels people think. And since 2023, Canada has had one of the strictest foreign buyer bans in the G7, a restriction now extended to 2027. Yet prices didn't fall after the ban. Why? Because foreign buyers were never the primary engine. The real forces behind the pandemic housing surge were ultra-low interest rates, domestic investors purchasing multiple properties, a shortage of rental housing, and approval timelines that take years instead of months. The headlines were about foreign buyers. The crisis was structural. The most important truth in this entire story is that Canada grew the demand side of the housing market at full speed, while the supply side stayed frozen in the planning philosophies of the 1990s. That gap wasn't created by immigrants or foreign buyers, it was created by policy. Ottawa's population targets were never aligned with building capacity. Mark Miller admitted population growth exceeded the capacity to house people, and internal federal briefing notes show the government knew housing construction was slowing while temporary resident intake doubled. When more people arrive, construction slows and approvals drag. The result is predictable: higher prices, lower vacancies, and cities overwhelmed. Temporary resident growth was the real accelerant. Between 2021 and 2024, temporary residents increased by nearly 250%. International students alone reached almost 1 million active visas. These individuals weren't the cause, but they were added to a system without student housing requirements, clear supply plans, or adequate provincial oversight. Private colleges expanded faster than municipalities could approve housing. Work permit pathways incentivized rapid enrollment. Provinces relied on tuition revenue and left cities to absorb the pressure. Meanwhile, federal and provincial governments entered a blame loop. Ottawa blamed provinces for failing to build housing fast enough. Provinces blamed cities for slow approvals. Cities blamed Ottawa for population targets without funding or infrastructure planning. Developers blamed everyone. And that's where the crisis fractures into reality. Canada doesn't have one housing market. It has multiple, shaped by geography, zoning, ideology, and policy. Ontario sits at the center of the crisis. The province grew far faster than it built. Between 2021 and 2024, Ontario added over 700,000 new residents, but completed around 80,000 housing units per year. Nowhere near enough. Approval timelines remain among the longest in North America, often taking 2 to 4 years for major projects in Toronto. Development charges are high, zoning restrictions limit density, and political back and forth creates constant uncertainty. Ontario didn't just fall behind, it reversed momentum while population surged forward. British Columbia faced similar pressure, but earlier. Between 2021 and 2024, the province added over 200,000 residents, while annual completions hovered around 40,000. Metro Vancouver's approval timelines are slow, influenced by neighborhood pushback, heritage regulations, and municipal processes that bottleneck multi-unit development. Most residential land remained low density for decades. Foreign ownership was visible in public debate, but data shows it played a small role even before taxes. The real driver was chronic undersupply mixed with domestic investor speculation. BC taxed demand before unlocking supply, which cooled transactions but not prices. Alberta was the outlier until recently. It built enough housing to remain affordable while other provinces struggled. Then migration exploded. Between 2021 and 2024, Alberta welcomed over 200,000 new residents, mostly from other provinces fleeing high costs. Approvals were faster and land cheaper, but demand eventually caught up. Rents rose faster than anywhere else in 2023 to 2024. Alberta isn't in crisis yet, but pressure is rising and could mirror Ontario's trajectory if building slows. Quebec avoided earlier pressures, but its system strained once population accelerated. The province added over 300,000 residents while completions declined from earlier highs. Montreal approvals slow large projects due to heritage rules and layered municipal processes. International student growth tightened vacancy rates and pushed rents upward faster than expected. Strong rent protections help existing tenants but discourage new rental development, preserving affordability for some while reducing stock for others. Manitoba saw moderate population growth, around 60,000 people, paired with flat construction averaging 6,000 to 7,000 units per year. Winnipeg's approval process can take up to 2 years for major projects. Single-family zoning dominates. As more students and newcomers arrived, vacancy rates tightened and rents climbed. Saskatchewan remained affordable longer, but early signs of pressure are appearing. The province added over 40,000 residents between 2021 and 2024, while completions stayed between 3,000 and 4,000 units annually. Vacancy rates in Regina and Saskatoon shrank, and development delays tied to infrastructure constraints slowed growth. Nova Scotia experienced one of the sharpest shifts relative to its size. The province added nearly 70,000 people while completions remained between 4,500 and 5,500 units annually. Halifax approvals lagged, and international student growth overwhelmed the rental market. Rents spiked, vacancy dropped near 1%, and emergency housing measures became common. New Brunswick followed a similar pattern. Roughly 45,000 new residents, fewer than 3,500 yearly housing completions, and rapidly tightening rental markets. Investor interest from outside provinces added additional pressure. Newfoundland and Labrador saw slower population increases, around 15,000 people, and under 1,500 annual completions. While not yet in crisis, aging housing stock and zoning barriers leave it vulnerable. Prince Edward Island, despite its size, experienced one of the highest growth rates per capita, adding over 20,000 residents while completions hovered around 1,200 units per year. Vacancy rates collapsed and rents surged. All of this leads to one point. The failure didn't come from people, it came from decisions. Canada expanded population faster than housing capacity. Between 2021 and 2024, IRCC raised temporary resident intake dramatically, while CMHC warned construction was slowing, and the country was already millions of homes short. Provinces then clashed with municipalities over zoning, fees, and approval timelines. Ontario's attempts to speed up development triggered legal fights, staffing shortages, and appeals that slowed progress even further. BC taxed speculation before scaling supply. Quebec protected tenants while unintentionally discouraging new rental investment. Alberta built faster, but demand eventually caught up. Cities faced planning bottlenecks, staff shortages, aging infrastructure, and decades-old zoning. Even when projects were approved faster, many didn't break ground. Not because cities blocked them, but because financing collapsed when interest rates rose and pre-construction sales fell. Meanwhile, universities and private colleges expanded international enrollment without expanding housing capacity. Their financial growth became a housing problem municipalities had to absorb. No single actor caused the crisis, but every institution contributed. Canada grew population on a timeline measured in months, while housing operates on a timeline measured in decades. To understand the human side of this, we need to recognize two parallel experiences. For newcomers, the reality was harsher than expected. A 2024 Ledger survey showed nearly 80% of new immigrants found housing much harder than expected, many spending more than half their income on rent. Most weren't competing for detached homes. They were competing for shared rentals, basement units, and student housing that didn't exist. For Canadian-born residents, the crisis felt like a system slipping away. A 2024 Angus Reid poll found two-thirds of Canadians believed immigration levels were too high because housing wasn't keeping pace. Frustration driven more by stress than xenophobia. Temporary residents amplify this pressure, not through intent, but through policy design. Between 2021 and 2024, the temporary resident population grew from 1.5 million to more than 2.5 million. Most settled in major cities already facing rental scarcity. Universities expanded enrollment, while housing remained stagnant. By late 2024, the federal government acknowledged the growth was unsustainable and introduced measures to reduce intake through 2025 to 2027. But that response arrived years after pressure peaked. Foreign buyers, the group often blamed online, had a real impact in perception but limited influence nationally. In Ontario, most foreign activity concentrated in specific Toronto condo segments, yet remained small province-wide. In BC, foreign buyers influenced sentiment more than supply. Even at peak, they represented a minority of transactions. Quebec, Alberta, and Atlantic provinces saw minimal foreign buyer pressure. The narrative overstated their role. The political blame triangle worsened the crisis. Ottawa said provinces and cities blocked housing. Provinces said cities resisted density. Cities said Ottawa sent population without infrastructure. Developers said rising costs and unstable policy made projects unviable. No one moved in sync, and housing supply stagnated. Looking ahead, the next 5 years will determine whether Canada stabilizes or entrenches this crisis. Population growth will remain positive, but temporary resident caps will cool rental demand slightly. Yet, CMHC estimates Canada still needs millions of additional homes to restore affordability by 2030, a goal increasingly out of reach. Alberta and Saskatchewan are better positioned to absorb growth. Ontario and BC will remain pressured without zoning acceleration and coordinated policy. Quebec will continue tightening. Atlantic provinces may see temporary relief, but structural shortages remain. The truth is simple. Canada invited people into a housing market it didn't build capacity for. The crisis didn't begin with immigrants. It didn't begin with foreign buyers. It began when policy expanded demand without preparing supply. Immigrants didn't set zoning. Students didn't stall approvals. Workers didn't pause construction. Everyone entered a system already straining. The next generation isn't asking for luxury, just the basic dignity of being able to afford a place to live. And for the first time, governments are acknowledging that dignity is at risk. The crisis wasn't caused by people. It was caused by decisions. And decisions can be changed.